There is a peculiar truth about the human mind: it is never silent. Even in the deepest stillness, thoughts arise like waves crashing upon the shore, whispering forgotten memories, reviving emotions long buried. Have you ever sat in complete silence, yet felt as if your mind was louder than ever? You close your eyes, seeking peace, but instead, memories flood in, faces from the past, words left unspoken, moments that refuse to fade. Some of these thoughts drift away like clouds in a summer sky, ephemeral and weightless. Others, however, take root, refusing to leave, no matter how much time has passed. Perhaps it is a friend you have not seen in years, yet their laughter echoes in your mind. Perhaps it is someone you once loved, whose presence lingers like the scent of rain on dry earth. Or maybe it is a stranger, someone you barely knew, yet for reasons unknown, they return to you in quiet moments, like a melody playing on repeat. Why does this happen? Why do some people pass through our thoughts like autumn leaves in the wind, while others remain embedded in the fabric of our consciousness? Many believe it is because of love, obsession, or fate, as if the universe has bound our souls together, refusing to let them part. But in Zen and Buddhist philosophy, the explanation is far simpler yet infinitely profound. There are two primary reasons why someone stays in your mind. 1. You have attached a part of your identity to them. 2. They hold an unresolved emotional lesson for you. It is not the person themselves we cling to, but what they represent, the words we never said, the choices we never made, the emotions left unanswered. They become a reflection of our own incompleteness, a mirror through which we glimpse the selves we could have been. Before we explore this truth more deeply, consider this: the mind does not cling without reason. Just as a river does not stop flowing unless obstructed, your thoughts do not return to someone without attachment or a lesson waiting to be understood. To illustrate this, let me tell you a story of longing, of lessons, and of the path to inner peace. It begins in a quiet temple, where an old monk tends to his lanterns, lighting the way for travelers passing through the night. One evening, he meets a visitor, a fleeting presence, yet one that lingers far beyond her departure. And in her, he finds the answer to the question that haunts us all: why do some people never leave our thoughts? The story of the lantern keeper, a tale of attachment and awakening. Deep in the mountains, nestled among the whispering pines, stood a secluded temple, where the old monk Ryokan lived in quiet contemplation. He found solace in the rhythm of his days, tending the garden, writing poetry, and lighting lanterns along the winding path to guide weary travelers. To him, each lantern was a small act of kindness, a flicker of warmth against the vast, indifferent night. One evening, as the sky blushed with the last light of day, a young woman named Ayame arrived at the temple gates. Her presence was gentle, yet there was something unspoken in her gaze, a quiet sorrow, a longing that even the stillness of the temple could not silence. Ryokan welcomed her as he did all travelers, offering a humble seat and a warm cup of tea. They did not speak much, yet the silence between them was rich with meaning. She watched the steam rise from her cup, her fingers tracing the rim as if searching for something lost. Then, softly, she asked, "Do you believe that people meet by accident? Or is every encounter meant to teach us something?" Ryokan looked at her, considering the weight of her words. But before he could answer, Ayame smiled, bowed, and disappeared into the descending twilight. The unshakable thought. Days passed, then weeks. The temple remained as it always had. The lanterns continued to glow. And yet something was different. Ryokan found himself thinking of Ayame, not just as a passing traveler, but as a presence lingering in his mind, an echo of something unfinished. Her question repeated itself like the tolling of a distant bell. Do people meet by accident? Each evening, as he lit the lanterns, he wondered why this one brief encounter had taken root in his thoughts. He had met countless travelers, spoken with many seekers, yet none had stayed in his mind the way she did. One night, as he sat upon the temple steps, lost in thought, his old master approached. The elder monk, wise and patient, observed the distant look in Ryokan's eyes before settling beside him. "What troubles your heart, my child?" Ryokan hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he admitted, "A traveler passed through our temple. She was here for only a moment, yet she lingers in my mind as if she never truly left. I do not understand why." His master smiled knowingly. Then let us examine this together. The illusion of the self that never was. The master reached for a small stone and rolled it in his palm before tossing it into the nearby pond. The water trembled as ripples spread outward, distorting the reflection of the moon. Tell me, Ryokan, the master asked gently, when you think of her, what do you feel? Ryokan exhaled slowly, a strange longing, as if something was left unfinished. As if I should have said more, done more, asked more. And what is it that you believe you lost? The master pressed. Ryokan furrowed his brow, searching within himself. A possibility, perhaps. The feeling that something meaningful passed through my hands before I had the chance to grasp it. His master chuckled, lifting the teapot beside him and pouring the last few drops into Ryokan's empty cup. Look at this tea, my child. It is gone. Can you still drink it? Ryokan shook his head. And yet, if you regret not savoring that last sip, your mind will continue to taste it, though it no longer exists. Ryokan felt the weight of realization settling upon him. He was not attached to Ayame herself, but to the version of himself that he never became in her presence, the words he never spoke, the choices he never made, the moments that never unfolded. You see, Ryokan, the master continued, it is not the traveler you are holding on to. It is the self you imagined you could have been with her. But that self was never real. It was only a shadow, a reflection on water, and just like the ripples in the pond, it vanishes the moment you stop trying to grasp it. Ryokan lowered his gaze, his heart heavy with understanding. But if it is only an illusion, why does it still feel so real? The master gestured toward the temple path, lined with flickering lanterns. Come, let us walk, the mirror of the unresolved. As they walked beneath the night sky, the master gestured toward the swaying trees. When the wind moves through the branches, does the tree chase after it? No, master, Ryokan replied. And yet, does the wind leave a trace? Yes, Ryokan murmured. The leaves tremble, the branches sway. Exactly, the master said. When someone enters our lives, they stir something within us. But we suffer only when we try to chase the wind, believing we can hold onto something that was never meant to be grasped. Ryokan frowned. But why does my mind keep returning to her? His master paused, then asked, tell me, what question did she leave you with? Ryokan thought deeply, and then it dawned upon him, the question Ayame had asked. She asked whether people meet by accident, or if every encounter is meant to teach us something. The master nodded. And what do you think? Ryokan hesitated before whispering, I think she was my lesson. The master's smile was gentle. Indeed, she was not just a traveler. Ryokan, she was a mirror, reflecting back to you something you had not yet seen within yourself. What do you think she revealed? The answer emerged from deep within Ryokan's heart. She showed me that I am still searching for something outside of myself, even when I believed I had let go of all attachments. His master placed a hand on his shoulder. And that, my child, is why she remains in your mind. Not because she is meant to stay, but because her presence forced you to confront what you had ignored within yourself. The path to liberation. The two monks returned to the temple, their steps slow, contemplative. The master poured Ryokan another cup of tea and placed it before him. When you accept that you have not lost anything, and when you learn the lesson they have brought you, the mind will release them. Ryokan lifted the cup, his fingers tracing its edges. He inhaled deeply, allowing the warmth of the tea to seep into him. For the first time in weeks, he felt something shift within him. Ayame was still in his memory, but she was no longer a burden. She was a lesson, a whisper in the wind, a single lantern glowing in the night, beautiful, fleeting, and free. And just like that, the thought of her loosened its grip. The mind, once clouded with restless echoes, returned to its natural state, still, vast, and unshackled. The first reason, the identity trap. Ryokan stared at the extinguished lantern in his master's hands. The absence of the flame made the darkness around them feel heavier, as if the night itself had swallowed something precious. Yet the lantern had served its purpose, it had burned, given light, and now it was gone. His master placed the lantern beside him. When a traveler passes through the temple, do they leave with something that belongs to us? Ryokan shook his head. No, master, they take nothing but their own experience. And yet, when she left, you felt as if something had been taken from you. Ryokan lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of his emotions settle upon him. His master's words had uncovered a truth he had not yet fully understood. "Tell me, Ryokan," the master continued, "who is it that you miss? The traveler, or the version of yourself that you believe could have existed with her?" The question struck deep. Ryokan hesitated, searching within himself for an answer. He thought of the unspoken words, the questions he had wanted to ask but never did, the connection he had felt but never explored. "I thought I missed her," he murmured, "but now I see. I miss the possibility of who I could have been in that moment. The version of myself who was courageous enough to speak, to reach out, to embrace the unknown." His master smiled knowingly. "And where is this version of yourself?" Ryokan opened his mouth to answer but fell silent. He realized that the person he mourned, the version of himself who had acted differently, did not exist. "He never was," the master said gently, as if reading his thoughts. "You have spent all this time clinging to a ghost, the illusion of the self that never was. The mind is skilled at crafting illusions, at weaving intricate tapestries of what could have been. It convinces us that if we had said something different, acted a little bolder, held on a little tighter, then life would have unfolded in a way that was more complete, more fulfilling. But these are just shadows, echoes of an identity that never came to be. People believe they mourn others," the master continued, "but more often, they mourn themselves, the self they never became, the choices they never made, the lives they never lived." Ryokan felt the truth of these words settle deep within him. He had thought it was Ayame's absence that left an ache in his heart. But it was the absence of his imagined self, the self who had been braver, wiser, more eloquent in that fleeting moment. "You see, my child," the master said, "we do not truly suffer because of loss. We suffer because we resist the truth that what was never meant to be, never was. The moment had passed. The path had not been taken. And no matter how many times his mind revisited it, no matter how many different endings it imagined, it could not rewrite reality. Regret is a cruel illusion," the master continued. "It tricks you into believing that the past is still alive, that it is still within your grasp. But tell me, Ryokan, can a river flow backward?" Ryokan shook his head. "No, master. The river moves only forward. And yet, when you dwell on the past, you try to force the river to return to its source. It is not only impossible, it is suffering. The weight of attachment to an imagined self." Ryokan thought back to all the times he had found himself lost in his mind, replaying that single encounter, wondering what he could have done differently. He saw now that he had not been reliving the moment itself. He had been trying to create a different version of himself within it. "When you attach yourself to an imagined self," his master said, "you imprison yourself in a story that never was. You are here, now, yet your mind wanders through a world that does not exist. This is the identity trap, the belief that happiness lies not in who you are, but in who you think you should have been." Ryokan exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his illusions begin to loosen. "And what happens when one sees through the illusion?" he asked. The master gestured toward the extinguished lantern. "You accept that the flame has gone out, and instead of mourning its absence, you light a new one. The past could not be changed. The version of himself that he had imagined, the self who had spoken more, done more, been more, was nothing but a wisp of smoke. The only self that existed was the one sitting here, now, and that self was enough." The second reason, the unresolved lesson. Ryokan's breath was steady, yet his heart felt unsettled. The revelation of his master's words echoed within him. "She made me realize that I have been searching for something outside myself." He had spent years practicing Zen, believing himself to be free from attachments. Yet a single encounter had unraveled the illusion of his detachment. The presence of Ayame had revealed something he had not yet faced, longing. A question that had always lingered beneath the surface of his solitude. His master placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "When a question rises from deep within, do not silence it. Instead, ask yourself, what is it that you truly seek?" Ryokan remained quiet, gazing at the lanterns flickering in the night breeze. He had never asked himself this before. He had walked the path of Zen, believing that to be free of suffering meant to renounce desire. Yet, Ayame's presence had stirred something undeniable. "Master," he said at last, "I thought I was at peace. But now I see that I have been running from something. My solitude was not freedom, it was avoidance." The master nodded. "And what were you avoiding?" Ryokan's voice was barely a whisper. "My own longing." The master chuckled softly, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of time. "Ah, then you are much closer to awakening than you realize. You see, Ryokan, we do not escape suffering by denying our emotions. We escape suffering by understanding them." Ryokan exhaled, feeling the knot in his chest begin to loosen. The mirror of the unfinished self. People enter our lives as either a mirror or a lesson. The master continued, "A mirror reflects something we have refused to see within ourselves. A lesson reveals something we need to learn." Ryokan's mind returned to his brief time with Ayame, the quiet presence she carried. The question she asked, the way her gaze held both wisdom and sorrow. She was both, Ryokan murmured. His master smiled. "Indeed, what did she mirror for you?" Ryokan thought for a long moment before responding. "She mirrored my own incompleteness. The part of me that still searches. That still longs for something beyond the present moment." "And what lesson did she bring?" Ryokan hesitated, then whispered, "That I have not yet fully accepted myself." The wind rustled the trees, as if the mountain itself had sighed in recognition of his truth. The master took a deep breath and continued, "Many believe that when someone lingers in their thoughts, it is because they were destined to be in their lives. But in truth, they remain because they have touched something within us that is unsettled, unexamined, or unfinished. So she was never meant to stay?" Ryokan asked, though he already knew the answer. "She was meant to pass through your life, just as the wind passes through the trees. But the wind does not leave without stirring the leaves. It moves them, shakes them, makes them aware of their own roots." Ryokan let the words sink in. The truth behind unfinished connections. Most people believe that if they cannot stop thinking about someone, it is because of love or destiny. But this is not always true. The master continued, "Sometimes, we are drawn to those who reflect our own unfinished stories. We long for those who stir within us a recognition of something unresolved. And so we mistake their presence for fate, when in reality, they are simply pointing us toward the part of ourselves we have yet to understand." Ryokan clenched his fists, feeling the tension in his body. "Then how do we let go?" The master gestured toward the temple garden. "You must stop asking why she remains in your mind and instead ask, what part of yourself is still seeking completion?" Ryokan's eyes followed the lanterns flickering in the distance. He had spent years searching for enlightenment, yet a single meeting had exposed the truth. He was still searching for something outside of himself. "You see, Ryokan," the master continued, "as long as you believe that peace exists outside of you, you will always be chasing it. But peace does not come from someone else. It comes from understanding why you seek them in the first place." Releasing the illusion, the master lifted a small pebble and tossed it into the nearby pond. The ripples spread outward, then slowly faded until the water was still once more. "This is the nature of thought," he said. "When a disturbance occurs, the mind reacts, creating waves of longing, regret, or attachment. But the water does not remain disturbed forever. It settles, as will your mind, if you allow it." "How?" Ryokan asked. "By seeing clearly, by understanding that Ayame was not meant to stay, but to awaken something within you. She was never yours to hold onto, only yours to learn from." Ryokan felt something shift within him. The weight he had carried, the ache, the longing, the endless questioning, was not because of Ayame herself, but because of what she had revealed about his own unfinished journey. She had been a mirror, showing him the part of himself that still longed for something beyond the present moment. She had been a lesson, teaching him that true peace comes not from avoiding longing, but from understanding it. And just like that, the grip of the past loosened. The ripples settled. The wind moved through the trees. And this time, Ryokan did not chase it. Letting go. Flowing like the river. Ryokan sat in silence, his hands wrapped around the warmth of his teacup. The steam curled into the air, disappearing as quickly as it had formed. He watched it dissolve, realizing how much of life was like this, impermanent, fleeting, yet deeply meaningful in its passing. His master's words echoed in his mind. When you accept that you have not lost anything, and when you learn the lesson they bring, the mind will release them. He had spent weeks resisting his thoughts, wrestling with Ayame's presence in his mind, believing that if he could just understand why she remained, he could force himself to move on. But letting go was not about pushing something away. It was about seeing it clearly, understanding its purpose, and allowing it to pass through naturally. His master took a sip of tea and then set his cup down with gentle reverence. "Tell me, Ryokan, have you ever tried to hold onto water?" Ryokan looked up, puzzled. "Water?" His master nodded. "If you scoop it into your hands and try to hold it tightly, what happens?" "It slips through my fingers," Ryokan said. "But if you keep your hands open, what then?" "It rests there, for a time, before flowing away naturally." His master smiled. "The mind is like this. The more we cling, the more we suffer. But if we allow thoughts, memories, and emotions to flow through us, without grasping, without resisting, they will come and go, just as they are meant to." Ryokan closed his eyes, feeling the truth of this. He had been trying to grip onto something that was never meant to be held. He had mistaken his attachment for love, his longing for loss, his reflection for reality. His master gestured toward the small stream that ran beside the temple. The water flowed effortlessly, neither clinging to the rocks nor resisting their presence. It simply moved forward. "When someone enters our lives," the master said, "they are like a stone cast into a river. At first, the ripples spread far and wide, disturbing the surface. But in time, the water continues to flow, and the stone settles where it is meant to be." Ryokan watched the water, mesmerized by its simplicity. He had spent so much energy trying to understand why Ayame lingered in his mind, not realizing that his very effort to let go was the very thing keeping her there. "Do not mistake stillness for emptiness, nor movement for loss," his master continued. "The river does not mourn the stone. It carries it when needed and leaves it when the time is right." Ryokan inhaled deeply, feeling the cool mountain air fill his lungs. He thought of Ayame, of her presence, her question, her departure. She was still in his memory. But now she was no longer a burden. She was a lesson. She was a passing traveler. Like all things in life. And just like that, her presence loosened its grip. The river flowed on, and so did he. The path to freedom. So, if someone lingers in your mind, pause for a moment and ask yourself, am I attached to a version of myself that never was? What lesson does this person bring me? Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. The more we grasp at thoughts, the more they entangle us, holding us captive in a world of what ifs and if onlys. But does this mean we should force ourselves to forget? Should we fight against their presence in our minds, trying desperately to erase them? No, forgetting is not the path. Understanding is. Letting go is not about denial or suppression, it is about clarity. It is about recognizing that the people who stay in our thoughts do so because they reflect something we have yet to understand. They serve as reminders, as unfinished teachings, as reflections of parts of ourselves we have not yet fully acknowledged. Instead of resisting, observe your thoughts like clouds drifting across the sky. Let them come and go, without judgment, without attachment. When someone enters your mind again and again, instead of asking, "Why can't I forget them?" ask, "What part of my identity am I attaching to them? What unresolved lesson are they reflecting back to me? Can I accept their presence, learn the lesson, and let them go naturally?" The river does not struggle to carry a fallen leaf. It does not hold on, nor does it force it away. It simply flows, and in time, the leaf moves with it, carried to where it belongs. This is how we find freedom, not by forcing our minds to be empty, but by allowing them to be clear. Not by clinging to the past, but by learning from it and moving forward. And when you do, you will find that the presence which once weighed upon you so heavily has transformed, not into loss, not into regret, but into wisdom, a lantern that once burned brightly but has now served its purpose, guiding you forward, and allowing you to walk freely into the vast, open night. Imagine your mind as a flowing river. When someone enters your life, they are like a stone tossed into the water. At first, the ripples spread in all directions, distorting the once calm surface. The water stirs, responding to the presence of the stone, just as your thoughts are stirred by the presence of someone who has touched your life. But what happens next? Does the river resist the stone? Does it fight against it, trying to force it away? No, the river does not struggle. It does not cling. It does not stop flowing. It simply moves forward. Some stones sink quickly to the riverbed, resting beneath the current, becoming part of the river's landscape. Others, carried by the flow, Travel downstream until they are no longer within sight. If someone remains in your thoughts, it means the stone has not yet settled. The ripples are still moving, still shaping the water, still echoing across the surface of your mind. But this is not a sign of weakness, nor a failure to move on. It is simply the natural rhythm of things. In time, all waters find their clarity. You do not need to force the stone to settle. You do not need to fight the ripples. You only need to allow the river to flow as it always has. And one day, without force, without struggle, the water will become still again, reflecting the sky with perfect serenity. This is how we let go. Not by forgetting, not by resisting, but by understanding, by allowing, by flowing forward. Some people pass through our lives like drifting leaves. Their presence brief, their impact gentle. Others enter like great stones, changing the current of our existence, teaching us lessons we never expected to learn. But in the end, the river always flows, and so must we. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect. What lessons have the people in your life taught you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you wish to explore more Zen and Buddhist teachings, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Until next time, may your mind be still, vast, and free.